So let's look at the additives we're going to put into this soap. So we've got sugar here, which is going to be mixed with some water. We've got some butternut squash. We have kaolin clay. We've got some mulberry silk in this one just here. And we've also got some coconut milk powder along with some citric acid. So the first thing we're going to have to do realistically is get our sugar and our citric acid both dissolved into some water so that they're easier to combine into our batter a little bit later on. And then what we'll do is we'll combine the lye with our goat's milk. And then we're going to show you what happens if you don't do what you should do with goat's milk and just allow everything to cool down slowly, maybe do it in a nice bath, or do the milk into oil method. I'll show you exactly what happens when you decide that you're going to put the citric acid and the sugar into the goat's milk too quickly. So once we've combined those, what we're going to do is move over to our goat's milk, and you can see that in the jug here. And I'm using spheres particularly because they cause a problem, which is they won't actually dissolve particularly quickly with the lye. As you can see, whether in the jug here, they're not actually touching very much of that lye because they have a very small surface area touching it. So if you are going to use goat's milk, I would always suggest using cubes rather than round balls like this. And you'll get a better contact, which means the lye will melt the milk a little bit quicker, but it also means that you'll get more liquid to stop them kind of heating up too much. Now, this is a mistake. What you shouldn't do is ever add additives like citric acid, which are going to react very violently with the lye, or sugar, which is going to increase the temperature. And you see adding both of those has caramelized that goat's milk, and trust me, the smell from this was quite something. All the doors and windows were open and I could smell it for a while afterwards. This is to show you that you really need to be careful when working with milks and sugars and citric acids in your lye solution, because it can really ruin a beautiful batch of soap just by being a little bit impatient, really. So be really careful of that, and trust me, you don't want to be smelling goat's milk that's caramelizing with lye, because it is absolutely vile. Anyway, we do have a lye solution and we're going to crack on with this because this is about getting as much into a soap as possible and whether it produces anything decent bar of soap. And we will find out with this one. So let's get our lye solution done there. And this again is another mistake. You should realistically add a smaller amount of silk than I've put in here. But again, we're trying to pack this out with loads of additives. You need temperature and you need the base to be able to melt the silk down into it. And this silk is really just sitting there and becoming this kind of matted clump of fibers, basically. I'm going to try and stick blend it out, and it just clumps the stick blender up. And really, if you are going to use silk fibers in your soap, you need to add them to preferably a water lye solution, but they do need to be in that very hot solution with a base so that they actually dissolve into it. And you can see this is just not dissolving into the soap. You're adding another protein essentially into that already melted caramelized sugar mix, and it's just not going anywhere. So when you are doing additives into your soaps, just make sure they're the right additives added at the right stage, at the right temperature, and they're not going to do weird things. So going in there with some sodium lactate. Sodium lactate is obviously going to harden bars up. Now, the only additive I am not adding to this, because I still wanted to be able to work and get a swirl or something into it, is salt. Because salt is a humectant, it draws moisture to the skin, but it also means that your batter is going to set up very, very quickly. And I don't really want that to happen. I want to be able to work with it. So we're not putting salt into here. But as you can see, in my very orange now goat milk base here, you can see I'm trying to still get that silk to dissolve, and it's just not going to dissolve. So I'm going to give it a quick blizz with the stick blender, and we'll move on to the next steps. So let's give ourselves a little bit of a wipe down here and move on to our next stage, which is to add some of the additives into our oils. Now, here we've got some butternut squash. Now, you can add vegetable or fruit matter into your soap. Again, what you need to be very careful of here is the amount of sugar that you're introducing into your soap, because that can affect the soap when it goes through saponification. And you just need to be a little bit careful of how much sugar you are adding into it. Otherwise, you can increase the heat and make it kind of crack on the top. What we have in there is some coconut milk powder. Now you can add fresh coconut milk into here as well, but you would need to adjust your water ever so slightly to avoid too much water being in the soap and therefore getting some significant glycerin rivers. And the third thing you can see me putting in there is some kaolin clay. Now, kaolin clay is a wonderful additive in soaps. It really helps kind of soothe the skin. It's often used in face masks and things like that. And you'll see a lot of people add it. Because it is a clay, me personally, I don't think it is affected too much by the saponification process and survives that. And therefore you are getting the benefit of that kaolin clay in the final soap when you come to use it. But that's just my personal preference. The only thing I'm going to say about my soaps is they will get you beautifully clean, and that's it. But I like those extra additives in there just to give you that kind of real kind of luxury feeling soap bar. So let's bring our lye solution back in here. And as you can see, it's still orange and it does have a little bit of a smell to it. So I've certainly caramelized this with all the additives that I've put into it. But this was the whole point of doing this experiment, was to just kind of show you what could go wrong and whether that will kind of really taint the soap at the end. So I'm going to run this through a strainer, but as you can see here, it's not working particularly well. It's going to take a long time for that to strain through, and I've spilt it in. So do you know what? We're just going to go with it. Things go wrong when you're soaping, and you just kind of have to go with it. Now, all of this silk that you see going in does actually get distributed through the soap really well, so there's nothing to worry about as far as that's concerned. One note on the silk. The silk I try and find is from basically from suppliers who allow the moths and animals inside the chrysalises exit the chrysalis before they then harvest the silk. So no animals have been harmed in the harvesting of that silk. So if you're vegetarian, you could look for those sorts of silk options. Or if you want to really keep this as a vegan bar, you can use what's called corn silk. Corn silk is the inside of the corn husk, all that kind of stringy stuff that you normally get from a corn husk. That will actually act very similarly to silk in a vegan way. So you've got two options there. If you want to keep this either a vegetarian or vegan bar, use those other options of silk. So anyway, we're just going to get this really nicely blended through, and you can still see that that colour has got that orange tint to it. And I'm going to add my fragrance oil in here now. I'm adding an arbitrary amount because this is for personal use and I'm not going to sell it. But if you are going to add a fragrance oil, this is the time you kind of want to measure it. This is just a lemon fizz fragrance oil. If you're wonderful kind of fresh citrusy fragrance without being too heavy or cloying, or either speeding up, slowing down trace, or in the examples for like citrus essential oils, you need a blend of them rather than just a single oil. So I was keeping this quite simple and went with a fragrance oil on this occasion. So we've gotten ourselves to an emulsion here, and we're going to basically do quite a simple pour. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is just pour my standard batter into the bottom of my mould. I'm then going to add some French red ventilated clay, which is a variation on kaolin, and it has a red clay colour to it. And again, we're just trying to overload this and seeing exactly what we can get away with and what we can't. So first off, I'm going to bring my little mould in here, which is one of my little green moulds. This makes about 3 or 4 bars, and it's absolutely fantastic. I really enjoy these little moulds. So we put our first lot of batter into the bottom of the mould there. We've still got a really nice fluid batter going on here. As soon as I add this additional clay, though, it's going to start absorbing some more of the water and the liquid oils that are left over in there, and it's going to thicken up quite quickly. That was 2 tablespoons, which is way too much clay, but do you know what? We're overloading this. We're going to overload it properly. So let's give this a stick blend. I think we've got enough space within this trace to give it a stick blend without it thickening up too much on us. Now, the thing with clays are they do tend to absorb the moisture and the water that's in the soap. So it will accelerate trace. It will thicken up quite quickly, and it will mean that you need to work a little bit quicker with this second batch, essentially. And when working with clays, I would always recommend putting some water or some oils into them and rehydrating them first before you add them into your batter. It'll mean that you can do some nicer swirls with it without getting it thickening on you too quickly. And also it means that you can adjust your recipe and still be within the tolerances of the recipe that you need to use for your assessment without adding in any more or less water or oils. And it's really worthwhile doing that initially. Let's bring our mold back in here and add our drop swirl of the red clay. And I'm just drop swirling that in from a relatively decent height, adding all of that clay in. And you can see how that's just kind of really thickened up a little bit. Any excess will go into one of my little molds. So I've got some personal hand soaps or travel soaps I can take with me. A very simple swirl on the top of this soap. And then just to finish this off, I will C-pop it in the oven, and I just like to cover with a little bit of cling film just to avoid any soda ash on the top of this and all of that. So we'll just get it wrapped up, popped in the oven and C-popped overnight. Now, unfortunately, I did not get the filming of the cut of this. So instead, what we're going to do is look at how well this lathers and whether it's a good idea to overload your soap with additives. So as you can see here, we're getting some really lovely big bubbles. So the recipe with all of those additives are looking really lovely. It's got some really nice tight ones in there as well. My one kind of thing that I would not do on a second time around is add quite so much of the red ventilated clay. As you can see, we're getting a little bit of deposit on the sink basin, which is not so good, but for all intents and purposes, you can see we've got a really nice lather there. It's leaving the skin feeling really clean, fresh. There's plenty of moisture in there. And here's a look at the final bar. So if you have enjoyed this video, please give it a like. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. It really helps me grow and it allows me to make more videos and tutorials for all of you. When you subscribe, don't forget to click the bell icon if you'd like to be notified when a new video is uploaded. Thanks a lot, Soapsters. See you again next time.